welcome to separation of a mixture. So we've talked about this question a few times. If you have a mixture of saline and salt water and you want to separate it into its three components, you'd actually have to do a two-step separation. You first have to filter to separate sand and salt water. And this would yield to salt water. In order to separate the salt water, you have to evaporate or distill or boil water away from the salt. This is kind of a classic question because it shows us some pretty important things here. You can use filtration to separate things based on particle size. However, filtration won't work with something like salt water because you have very similar particle sizes in the solution, the ions versus the water. So remember, when forming a mixture, you're always doing a physical change. Just some kind of little notes to remember here. You don't necessarily need to write these down, but you should kind of keep in mind that when you see the symbol AQ, your solvent is water, and we're not talking about a substance. What's very important at this point is to keep in mind that an aqueous solution cannot be separated by filtration. We need to use another method, and typically boiling away the water is the method that we choose. So there's some different ways you can separate a mixture. Mixtures will separate based on density. So less dense substances or materials will often float on more dense liquids. In our classic example, this is when you see oil floating on water. You actually have this occur with water as well. In like a large body of water, like a lake, different zones have different temperatures, which affects their densities. And those different temperature zones don't really mix very much because of the different densities of water. Particle size, you can separate by filtration. And this is a great example. Same in water, you can think about sifting like dirt through a sifter, but you have to have a difference in particle size in order to use filtration. Molecular polarity, if you have different polarities, substances with different polarities won't dissolve each other. Again, this ties back into that oil and water example. So whenever a question would be asking you about, molecular polarity and something dissolving something else, if they're not dissolving, it means they have different polarities. So that is, a way to separate things. Boiling point or freezing point, and this includes distillation, which is a separation based on boiling point. If you have two things mixed together and you can boil one of them away or freeze one of them out, the other substance will still remain because it keeps its original properties since we're talking about a mixture. So this is the example where you can boil water away from salt and saltwater mixture. And solubility just generally means if something dissolves something else, if two things don't dissolve one another, they can be separated that way, and that ties back into